Hey there, welcome. We're super excited to have author and speaker Lauren Reitsema on the show today. Lauren's interest in relationship skills training began when she was a middle schooler and her parents divorced after almost 20 years of marriage. Seeking to better establish a legacy of relational health for her future, Lauren followed a bachelor's degree trajectory with a communication studies at TCU. Lauren is the author of the book In Their Shoes, dedicated to helping parents better understand and connect with children of divorce. Her second book, Relationship Essentials, features skills to help people feel heard, fight fair, and set boundaries in all areas of life.
Lauren's vocational speaking experience spans over 15 years, teaching a variety of relationship skills to teens, adults, and corporate teams. She recognizes relationships are one of life's most important assets and energizes a room to prioritize the people in their lives. Lauren serves as president of the Center for Relationship Education in Denver, Colorado. She and her husband, Josh, love adventures with their 3 children, all Colorado natives. They're avid skiers, outdoor enthusiasts, and Bronco fans. Okay, if you're not a big Broncos fan, please don't tune us out because we're confident that you're going to gain so much from our conversation with Lauren right on the other side of the intro. Welcome to the Blended Family Breakthrough Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike and Kim.
We believe in a world where blended families can experience a future full of hope, connection, and peace.
That's why we offer tools, strategies, and guidance that move you from a place of confusion and conflict to experiencing a life of confidence and connection.
We're so glad you're joining us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations as we cover everything from romance to parenting and yes, even dealing with that difficult ex.
So if you're ready to experience breakthrough in your blended family, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Well, hello, Lauren. Welcome back to the show. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Now, we've had you on the show before. Some of our listeners may remember we had you on with Ron Deal. We had you on with your mom. That was a really fun interview.
It was.
But we really wanted to have you on the show solo to talk about your amazing book that we absolutely love called In Their Shoes, and to offer some hope, some helpful tips for bio parents and step parents that really want to understand what their children are experiencing so that they can come alongside in the process of divorce and remarriage and really do this, I say do this well, to the best of their ability, as their kids might be really hurting and struggling. So we're thrilled to have you. And I'm wondering if we could just start off. Some of our listeners may not know you. And so if you could just start off sharing your story, your background, and what inspired you to write this book.
I'd love to. Thank you for the opportunity. I think I always marvel at the fact that In Their Shoes is a book in print because it was never something I actually decided to go after or to pursue, but it really is the book that kind of walked toward me. And so I am my current vocation is in the relationship skills training industry. I'm the president of a nonprofit headquartered in Denver, Colorado that has a proprietary curriculum brand and does training and certification around the country to help humans connect in communities, at work, with families. And that actually stemmed from my whole career path, stemmed from my own personal family story of inspiration, really leaving for college as a child of divorce after my parents had been married for 18 years and just really struggling with that reality that I was a statistic that I read about. And I was, the person who had the back and forth between houses. And I was the kid who had a new title and a new name and in different roles and family dynamics that weren't familiar. And so I never really sought out to be an expert in the field of divorce or blended family, but rather to give voice to something that actually felt really silent in my journey, which was, how are people processing this? What does this mean for their emotional thought process, both publicly and privately? How can we prevent some of the pain that comes with this in the future? And
Yeah.
ultimately, is there anything I've learned or I'm learning that I wish I had known when I was younger, preparing for my own marriage, or now as a parent myself, that I could share with other people? And so I think that it's kind of a gracious journey of pain has led me to process things that I never had resources or voice in. And as I graduated from college, began doing this work vocationally, and started having a lot of different coffee dates and lunch encounters with step parents who were just entrusting to me their struggles with their own connections. I thought, well, have you thought about it this way? Or from my experience, this is, and
Sure.
I just started capturing some of those moments, those stories. And quite a few years after I was a child of divorce, I felt like the voice of my experience kind of came to me in a lot of inspired writing and journaling and speaking. And I just happened to be speaking at a conference one time where somebody pursued me to say, you need to write your story down. And I didn't think it was possible, and I didn't think it was probable, but it was an epic journey that has created something I think really special. And I'm hopeful and thankful that it can continue to give people just a new perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're glad you took that epic journey and wrote the book.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you on to talk specifically about this today, Lauren, because it was 5 years ago. It's June of 2020 that we released an episode right after we read the book that was sort of like a book report. So it's been like 5 years since we've had opportunity to just focus on this resource, and we're super glad that you are here to be the one to share about it. So thank you.
How fun. Wow, 5 years really flies, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does.
And we absolutely believe that this is a resource every blended couple needs to have in their hands. But I love the tagline of the book, helping parents better understand and connect with children of divorce. And I'm wondering if you can tell us why this topic is so important, and not just for bio parents, right? It seems obvious that, yes, bio parents need to be there and supporting their children, but for step parents as well, because like you just said, part of your journey was talking with step parents and understanding what they were experiencing. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of empathy in this journey?
Does it ever feel like people just don't get how tough it is to blend a family? What if you could experience a community that's all about healthy support, guidance, and practical strategies that help you thrive in your blended family? Well, now you can. Blending Together is a supportive community for blended family couples just like you.
We've educated and supported hundreds of couples navigating the unique challenges of blended family life. Now we're inviting you to join our community and experience the transformation that awaits you. Blending Together is not just another community. It's a place where you'll find practical, real-life strategies for building unity as a couple,
Creating more connection as a family,
experiencing partnership in parenting,
and even dealing with that difficult ex.
Blending Together is a safe, growth-focused space where you'll get to connect with us, and maybe more importantly, with other blended family couples who truly understand what you're going through. Along the way, you'll discover practical tools, guidance, and hope that empower you to find a future full of confidence and connection.
When you join Blending Together, you'll gain access to a variety of resources like our private Facebook group and online learning platform, monthly coaching meetings, monthly Q&As, and you'll even get to vote on the content for our monthly workshops.
Blending a family can often leave couples feeling alone or isolated, and quality support can sometimes be expensive and hard to find. That's why we're offering you access to all of this at a super low monthly rate. because every blended family deserves the opportunity to thrive regardless of their budget.
So scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes and click the link to join us in the Blending Together community and meet other couples just like you in our upcoming community meeting. Plus, when you join before the end of the month, you'll gain access to our brand new bonus mini course that will help you make quick headway. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. We can't wait to meet you inside Blending Together. Just click the link all the way at the bottom of the show notes to get started.
We'll see you there.
I'd love to. I mean, the ultimate desire of the subtext in the title is that connection is an imperative part of humanity, healing, and just the heart of, I think, design and relationship. And divorce by nature disconnects. It disconnects in a pretty abrasive, oftentimes very caustic and costly circumstance. And so it's challenging enough to connect with your children when you're in a, semi-healthy, not totally toxic, but a little bit unhealthy.
Right.
There's just everybody has struggles to connect. Isolation and disconnection is the new Surgeon General's warning out of DC in 2023 in April, that the mental health epidemic of loneliness and isolation is actually killing our society. And so if you already have a fracture that's challenging, the experience that I know is to run away from that pain, and the disconnect just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so you have to do a lot more work to override those brain pathways of self-protection and defense to try and press into it, try and lean into it. And I do believe that because of the work of trying to connect and understand through seeing somebody else's journey, seeing somebody else's perspective, getting in their shoes, it actually softens. For me, it actually created a space where I could feel healthy, even though my family was statistically an unhealthy, failure. I actually see that our blended family sometimes exhibits more signs of health than an intact bio family, just because we've worked to try to stay connected. And so I don't think you can connect without empathy, because it's already an uphill battle. It's already something that you have to work toward, and not everybody even knows that they need that, let alone wants to do it. And so if you can press in to say understanding and empathy are key and appropriate tools to get there, I think it just re-engenders a hope that's often lost in the divorce and remarriage journey.
Yeah. I love what you just said there, that like our blended family might be even more connected than some first families. And the way I kind of interpreted that is, well, we've had to do different work in order to intentionally maintain connection. Do I hear that right, Lauren?
Yeah, that's a great recall. Additionally, my own bio legacy of my marriage and my children is forever protected because of the work that I had to do as a result of something that was out of my control. And I really do believe that my current satisfaction in my relationships, my marriage, my parenting and community is a result of the striving to understand what happened, how we could do better, and how to repair some really challenging circumstances.
So you personally have said, okay, I want to get a deeper understanding of what I experienced. I want to know how that impacted my mind and my heart. And I want to do the work I need to in order to repair any strain or strife, so that our broader blended family can have connection as a legacy, as opposed to contempt. Do I hear that right?
I think that was a beautiful paraphrase. And ultimately, I think I bought into the lie a little bit that I would just find a better person than my parents did, or I would love better than they did, but that as I looked at my family tree and saw this wasn't just my parents, this was, some aunts and uncles, some grandparenting relationships. And, I just graduated a kindergartner. My youngest is now a first grader. I've got a kindergartner, are now a first grader, a seventh grader, and a sophomore in high
Mm.
school. And uh, the only math homework that I feel equipped to help with is my
Yeah.
kindergartners. And she brought home, something on patterns the other day. And it's so profound to see, circle, star,
Mm.
circle, circle, star, circle. And a pattern is by law repeats itself unless you introduce something
Yep.
new. And I think the blended family pattern without introducing new elements and new perspectives and new considerations actually does repeat
Mm-hmm.
itself. And so if we're trying to get ahead of it, we need to do that work to say, okay, this wasn't just my parents' fault because
Mm-hmm.
they were, they didn't love each other. They didn't get the education about relationships
Mm-hmm.
that so many of us lack, and they didn't know any different. And so now that I know, what can I do and what am I responsible to do to change that pattern?
Yeah, that's so good.
Mm.
As you know, Lauren, I also grew up in a blended family. My blended family was as a result of the death of my mother at a really early age. My blended family is very dysfunctional. There was a lot of abuse that happened in the home and that kind of thing. And, I think it's easy to launch into adulthood after, less than ideal childhood experiences, thinking, I'm never going to do this or I'm
Never
never
gonna
going to be
repeat
what
it.
they did and those kinds of things. But
Yes.
I learned pretty quickly, especially early on in our marriage, that knowing what I don't want isn't the same as knowing how to get what I do want.
Yes.
And I had to go on a totally different journey of like, okay, well, shoot, if I don't want that and I do want this health and this authenticity and this openness and this connection that you're talking about, then I need to go figure out how to get that because I don't have a model for it. And so that was a big journey for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a really profound way to connect the missing link between wants and desires and
Mm.
awareness and then resource to get
Yeah,
it. I think of like the Pinterest boards that are
sure.
up, or you just really feel like, oh, if only our fire pit area actually had some rocks that weren't full of moss and
Hmm.
mold. But you can't just wish it away and look out your
Yeah.
window and go to Home Depot and
Yeah,
just want it to happen. You actually have to go out and do some of the
that's right.
work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find that meaningful because that's the biggest hurdle, is admitting that you need to work and then wanting to work,
Hmm.
because you'll realize that when you start it, it's labor.
Hmm.
It's not, you're not being an influencer by having a nice message to share. You're actually out in the field getting under some rocks and turning over some soil that is sometimes challenging to see,
Yeah,
but the dividends are always worth
Yeah.
it.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So Lauren, you and I are kind of sharing right now about, us being children coming out of those previous experiences and doing our own learning. I think there's a lot of parents and step parents in their current blended family journey that are struggling, and they also need to do some reflection and some work. And often the adults coming in are thinking, okay, now we're committed to each other. We've decided that we're going to do life together. Our kids should have the capacity to just adapt and embrace our blended family dynamic.
Right.
But it doesn't take them that long
Mhm.
to start getting confused and disappointed, even frustrated because kids are acting out or they're starting to be reluctant to accept this new family reality. What insight might you share today about how does a family identity or this changing family identity
Mm-hmm.
really impact kids?
Yeah.
Let's help parents and step parents understand that.
It's such a meaningful question, and one that I think is the heart of this book, is that so often the refresh, the restart, the remarriage, it is a beautiful new beginning, a second chance
Mm-hmm.
at being loved well. That's kind of how I approached it for some of the family members.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is not a new fresh start for the children, regardless of their age. Regardless, they will for a lifetime be the ones responsible to maintain duplicity in how they show up, and exhaustion in just being spread thin between responsibilities of where things are
Mm-hmm.
in different physical locations, adapting to new traditions, new personalities, new styles. And so what feels like a fresh start that the kids should just catch up to for a remarried couple is actually a re-engaged grief for a child. I remember going through multiple stages of grief. I talk about the stages of grief in general to kind of open the book and the narrative and just recognize that it's not fast necessarily. It's not the same for everybody, but there are a lot of studied and tried and true understandings of the grief process that we can expect to run into or bump into some of those stages, if not all of them. But the stage that's often quiet or silent for a child is the acceptance of, I will forever be changed because of this. And a lot of kids don't want change. They actually don't need the change that you need in a midlife crisis to make you feel seen. Like they actually need stability. You know, the best social psychologists and youth experts will say that the most important safety element for a kid is predictability, stability, and giving them a foundation that when they start to go out on their own, when they're independent, they know what to expect. You throw a blended family into that and nothing is the same. Everything changes from the big to the small, whether you move houses or you now have a new thing for dinner that your previous parent structure never knew how to make. Some of the changes could be interpreted as good, but many of them actually create an identity crisis that who am I and where do I fit? And I think that's why the get over it and adapt and why aren't you here yet? And why is this taking so long? That feels really, really heavy and hard and frustrating for the parent and step parent role, needs to be maybe reframed as an incremental lifetime journey, that adaptation may actually never take the form that you feel you're capable of. Yet staying the course and being patient and enduring, you're dealing with an identity crisis here. You're not dealing with a new tradition, if you will. And so I actually remember that word in that drafting part of my book. There was a place in my journaling where I wrote it down as identity crisis, and I went back and forth. I talked to some experts that I know. It just felt too much. I felt like I was being too much, and maybe I was being a little too bold. But the more I went back to the content of that reality, I had to stick with the word crisis, because it felt like a unraveling of your entire childhood's role, which was to secure your identity and discover who you are and then launch. And a divorce narrative or a death in the family and then a remarriage takes that identity and just throws it into a brand new ecosystem. And it's almost like starting in infancy again to figure out, who am I? Where do I belong? Why do I fit? And that adaptation process is not an overnight or easy journey.
So this piece of the grief process of acceptance that you talked about a minute ago, this word grief, a lot of parents push back. Like, we don't want to talk about grief. Like, we're through the divorce, we're on to new things, we're looking forward. I don't want to go back and talk about the grief part. What can you say to parents and step parents who just kind of want to put on blinders and move forward, even though they've got these children that are grieving and dealing with this identity crisis? What are the benefits of talking about grief and help our children move through that? Because so many parents just are reluctant. It's painful for them.
It is. And I think there's a cultural barrier there too, at least in the Western United States. We want to avoid, bury, circumvent anything that's uncomfortable. I mean, commercials are hard for us to watch because we don't have the patience for them anymore. And we all watch everything on YouTube TV and fast forward them and get really frustrated when we get stuck with the show that was too recently released that you can't actually fast forward the commercial. So if we're not ready to face the pain of waiting 90 seconds before our sporting event comes back on, imagine how reluctant we are to face the pain of broken vows,
Mm.
disappointments, financial stress, um, and the pain of knowing that your kids are in
Yeah,
pain. I
exactly.
talked to a family most recently who's going through this, and just that raw heartbreak of I can't stand to see my kids in pain. And I actually just said to this friend, I said, I need you to stand it and stand with it and actually lean into it, because
Mm.
that's going to be what heals them.
Yes.
See, we expect that we're going to experience the healing by burying the pain, but the grief step in the process is actually this paradox that I can't explain
Mm.
in any type of semantics that would do it justice. But there's just something about without death, you can't have
Mm.
life. And I see it seasonally, just living in Colorado and watching, some of the organic, natural elements of,
Hmm.
the snow melting into waterfalls, which then go into the whitewater rivers, which then we, trout fish on with
Mhm.
our fly rods in the summer. And then but there's this weird, muddy, gross dead season
Yeah.
from, about March until June, where you're like, what are we doing here? And I remember having a piece in my landscaping and my husband, my first house, that we moved into our house in the dead of winter. It was late January. It was snowy. We were moving based on necessity, not because we wanted, a brilliant landscape. And we actually had to buy a house that had really ugly
Mm.
backyard, wintry death. And there was this really pokey branch like thing that was woven into the outside of our entry door. And every time I would get home from the grocery store, the plastic bags would catch on the thorns of this dead
Oh.
plant. And it just made me so mad. I'd be like, Josh, I'm freezing and I'm picking up oranges. And this is before canvas bags. And we just, I said, let's just get rid of this stupid plant. And then June came, and this thing bloomed into the most fragrant
Mm.
wall of vibrant fuchsia roses
Oh,
that I had ever seen. And it was one of those stop and smell the roses moments that I do really
Mm.
remember, that here I am complaining about the thorns and the pain and the death and the nuisance that this
yeah.
this brush was having. And all I want to do is take a bunch of landscaping artists and just get rid of it. And what I didn't know is that I didn't see that under the surface of staying in the course and verbalizing how annoying it was, that I would actually be stopped in my tracks to see the fragrant beauty
Mm.
of a new form and new life. And I actually think, I mean, one of the biggest mysteries that I just wonder about with blended families is when you're going through the pain of divorce and when you're contemplating new marriage and why not just sit down with your children age appropriately and say, hey guys, this is hard for
Yes.
us. And my heart is heavy about this, and I didn't ever want this. But instead, we have to say, no, 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 you deserved this, and this is better
Yeah.
for our family,
Mm.
and we're going to
It's
be
all
so
good.
great. And actually think you would get to the end result faster if you were honest about the pain you're
Mm.
feeling. And obviously, we have to be careful about projecting
Sure.
adult concepts on young hearts, but there's a certain level of, man, I see you're
Yeah.
sad, and I'm sad
Mm.
too. And those tears are not going to be without a process. And if you feel safe, like, will you let me
Mhm.
know when your heart is hurting next time so that I can be there with you? And then you can say, because we felt the pain,
Hmm.
because we've been angry, because we've dealt with the human emotion, now it's released. And
Yeah.
we can actually move on to the joy and the peace and
Mm.
the goodness and the abundance that comes from reconciliation and healing. And so, it may never be perfect. You're
Yeah.
not going to have the exact same structure, but just like a bone
Yeah.
regrows, its fragments actually grow stronger. My youngest broke her leg skiing when she was 5. She broke her tibia and her fibula, and she was in so much physical pain. But watching the X-rays was just a really cool story to be able to say, look at how the regrowth of your bone has actually made you stronger,
Mhm.
and
Mm.
so you're going to be even better skier
Yeah.
next year when you come back.
Yeah.
And I want us to be more
Yeah.
comfortable with those conversations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And they had to lean into the pain of that little broken leg to reset it and get it ready and all of that in order to get beyond that, which is kind of what you're talking about. How do we lean in and actually sit in that pain with a child?
Be present with it and press into it instead of going, under or around
Yeah.
it, because you can't avoid that it's
Yeah.
Right.
painful. Anyone who says that this is not a painful process is not being authentic or honest, because nobody wants heartbreak, and heartbreak is at the center of broken disappointments. And ultimately, that is an important process that people skip
Yeah.
over. And I want to invite people to stay there a little
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they can emerge from a place of health on the other side after walking through that hardness and that pain.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we can go back for just a moment on that idea of identity crisis. One of the things that we've been continuing to learn that, the way that we're loved or the way that we experience love is a piece of our identity. And one of the important components of really having a solid identity and experience love is having a sense of belonging.
Yes.
Can you say how belonging kind of impacts this identity crisis?
If you could, if you could distill the human heart into one wish and desire, I think you just nailed it. I want to belong and I want to matter and I want to be seen and be a part of something. And I think for a child, a sense of belonging, particularly if you're caught in the crosshairs of the new beginning. I'm going to do a before and after kind of analogy to help understand that middle ground of where the belonging felt in jeopardy from a child's perspective of divorce. Because when you have a family and you have a last name and you have teachers at your school who know you and they know your siblings and they know where you live and you're a part of a community, and you start to say, like, I belong here. This is my home. This is my room. This is my mom. This is my dad. These are my parents. And I belong here because that's what a family unit is. It's an ecosystem of community. And when there's a split and then a remarriage, you actually go somewhere that you don't belong. You don't know the expectations. You don't know the personalities. You don't know the challenging behind the scenes conversations. There's almost a silent narrative that parents feel like their kids aren't catching because maybe they're having, conversations in their bedroom, or when their kids are with the other parent in the timeshare of the custody agreement, they're having all these conversations. But when you're in front of a group of people that is supposed to be your safe space, and they've been talking about you, they've been disgruntled about your attitude, that they might be questioning your character or the lack of gratitude that you've been explaining, they feel it, that they don't belong there. And it's just a where do I fit kind of question, because in my case, my mom got remarried. She took on a new last name. My dad got remarried, and then they had a baby who formed kind of a new identity that was attached to my maiden name. And the only place I felt like I belonged in that middle was the first marriage kids. And I have 3 siblings. So we were like the first marriage kids. And that was an identity in itself. We were a tribe and a community, and only my siblings know what it was like to navigate that. But I don't want to be a first marriage kid or a trial kid. I want to be a part of a family that's welcome everywhere, that knows the relationship, that understands the dynamics. And that's just really hard to do when you're not a part of it full time. And so I think you just always feel like there's a piece of posturing, a piece of acting, a piece of projecting that you're trying to belong again, but none of it feels organic because you were uprooted from a system that felt so different.
Yeah. And so much is out of your control. There's this new person living in your home with your parent. You didn't choose them necessarily. You don't know them. You don't understand why they're together or what's happening. I mean, there's so much out of a child's control that is disarming.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough for them.
Yeah. So I wonder, Lauren, would you be willing to share one or two things that either one of your parents or one of your step parents did to help you experience just a little bit more belonging somewhere in the journey?
That's a good question. I think ultimately, time is not a healing agent by itself, but I do think that when I felt like my step parents were being more patient with my process and letting me come to them as opposed to, them forcing themselves, when I had autonomy and decision making
Mm-hmm.
power, I felt a little bit more open to sharing and receiving from them. We all kind of learned that along the
Mm-hmm.
way, and probably could have gotten ahead of it a little bit more had I had the words when I was going through it that I wrote it in their shoes. But one of the things I talk about is that kind of forced assumption that you should be ready now versus, are you ready? Do you want to be ready? And if you're ready, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's just a good practical strategy. Consider from a step parent role, is the child ready? Are they, what cues are they giving me that shows readiness? And if they're not, am I willing to wait? Because I think there's so much behind the scenes incredible patient endurance that happens with a step
Yes.
parent that they don't deserve to have to wait 9 years for a kid to come around. And there's kind of a breaking point or snapping point where they're like, we're good, for the first couple years, we're just going to let you do your thing and celebrate your
Mhm.
birthday and just give you your space. But, at 5 years, you need to be
Yeah.
Yeah.
calling me
Yeah.
mom, writing me thank you
Mm-hmm.
notes,
Yeah.
inviting me into the dress shopping for your
Yeah.
wedding. And sometimes that just doesn't line up with the reality of expectations that is in that child's heart and space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's an unfair expectation, but I think it's going to be a more satisfying expectation to release timeframes and even pictures, like how you picture it. Just let go
Yeah.
of all that you think is going to happen and then create and craft what could happen with the data you're seeing in
As you
front of
go.
you. Because as you
Mhm.
go, I just think any type of forced entry is just not, it's not kind, it's not compassionate, and it actually can delay
Mm-hmm.
the willingness of the child to come around.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just the mentality of almost imagining that this child is never going to accept me and then being really surprised when
Yeah.
it happens
Yeah.
because of your graciousness.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
So prepare for the worst without losing hope.
Yes.
Yeah.
yes, that's
Yeah,
a
and
good way
that's
to
one of
say
the
it.
things I love about your book is that you're so encouraging for step
Mm-hmm.
parents to be steadfast and present, even in the face of rejection, but in a way that honors the child and honors their process. And I'm wondering, because we hear a lot from step parents who are in this place of frustration and they're trying to interact with a stepchild. They're trying to be civil and courteous and just baseline, oh, good morning and how was school or how are you doing? And they end up feeling so hurt and crushed when the stepchild just ignores them, just walks by them,
Mhm.
nose in the air, especially teens,
Mm-hmm.
who just have an attitude and just want nothing to do with them. And then it feels like disrespect and now it, morphs into this whole, we need to get on this kid. They're, disrespectful. But what would you say to a step parent who's just being ignored? They want to connect. Their heart is in such a good place of this desire to want to be there for this child, and they're just no, not having it.
Well, the first thing I would say is if it's a teenager, uh, that's a teen issue. That's not a step parent issue because I have two budding teens and one of my favorite lines is, I'm glad my invisible suit is working because nobody's listening to me. Apparently I'm just not in the room. Your friends are more important than your
Yeah.
family. And so I think just equipping yourself with the knowledge of what is normal launching behavior and pushing those boundaries. Now don't let them walk all
Right.
over you and be totally disrespectful. Set healthy boundaries. And one of the ways that we've tried to navigate that in our current family dynamic is, hey, we understand that your peers and your friends and everybody else except for your family and your parents are going to take precedent in your life, and we're going to try and give you the appropriate amount of freedoms to explore that. However, you're not allowed to give your best to the world and your worst to us. And so if you want to be with your friends, you need to give us the decency of human kindness and respect. I don't care what role we play, like we are humans and we're people and we do a lot for you. And so if you can't show us that baseline at home, then we're going to take some of those rights where you're your best self away, just to practice the art of humanity, not even the step parent thing. The second thing I'd say about that is I struggle to say this with any type of expertise, because I'm just going to say who I am and who I'm not. I am not a step parent. I'm a stepchild. And so I feel like I could share something with a perspective of maybe the advice that I would give, with knowing with a grain of salt that I don't know your lived experience. And so I just want you to know from my perspective, I know, because I was the kid who made it really challenging for my step parents, and they didn't deserve it, and it was unkind. And so I'm sorry on behalf of all of the yuckiness you get from stepchildren. But I think, again, toying a little bit on that idea of not being afraid to talk about harder things, maybe just a quick conversation to say, hey, I know this is challenging for you. It's also challenging for me. And we're in this together. Can we come up with a set of expectations? Can we talk about like what feels awkward? And because I think if you invite a child to actually be almost like a wise old soul or a counselor, to feel like they have power in the situation, you actually might make progress, because the power dynamic is always going to be favoring the parent, just because of age and responsibility and just kind of social dynamics. But if you get the kid a voice and say, okay, I feel like I'm not doing this well. Like, I feel lost and nervous and embarrassed, and that's hard for me to say, but I'm just going to take a guess that you also don't know how to approach me. Can we talk about that? And I just wonder, would that open a door to say, yeah, I do feel weird around you in my robe, because you've been here for, a year, and it took me a long time to get comfortable in like the morning routine with my own parents. And so I just wonder, I'm throwing it out there with a food for thought, not with a do this, but I could see that having some value.
I think it would depend on the child's openness, of course, but just calling out the difference. I know things are different now for you. Like things are different now that I live here. Yeah. And I get that. And I'm wondering if we can just talk about what are the things that are different for you, and how can we navigate this together? Yeah, I love that.
I think what I really like about what you just said, Lauren, too, is it's so focused on, you talked earlier about connection. And so many step parents, me included, I'm guilty, are focused on compliance. Especially with teenagers. It's like everybody needs to comply. We've got rules and everybody needs to follow. And one of those rules, spoken or unspoken, is you need to say hi to me when I say hi. Right. But when you're what you just said of, look, I feel like I'm just messing this up. There's some humility in that, being genuine about it. And my guess is you feel like this is a bit awkward too. Can we just talk about that? That is so focused on connection and not compliance. And so I think that's great advice, Lauren. Thank you.
I really like that. C in the C, connection and compliance, and what the end goal really is.
Absolutely. We have some people in our community that always tease us about alliteration. So Chris, if you're listening, that was for you.
Well, you're in good company, because I love alliteration and acronyms. Those are my two favorite things. They're all over my writing.
Us too.
And here's another one that step parents can focus on. What's more important, relationship or being right?
Yes, that is a good one. I have used and heard that maybe from you before, and it is super powerful to say, what's the end goal here? And there's a lot of nuance and gray in that, because we need truth, and we need discipline, and we need you can't have a boundaryless society. Well, that's all true. but you're never going to get to compliance without even the
Mm.
baseline of respect. And so you have to build the first before you get to the second.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, true compliance is going to come from somebody who actually wants to comply. And that only comes when I can trust and respect the person that I'm complying to.
Yes.
Like it was a lot easier for
Good.
me when I was a kid to do hard things for teachers and coaches who I really respected and looked up to, as opposed to the ones that took no time or effort to connect with me. They asked me to do hard things. It's like, what do I want to do that for? Seriously?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's
It's
so true. Without respect, you don't really get any type of
Yeah. And
no,
relationship.
trust.
no.
Yeah.
You might get the act of compliance, but you're not going to get the heart of compliance.
And the heart of compliance is really where connection
Yeah.
lives, is I want to do this because of
Yep.
relationship, not because of some sort of rigor
Yes.
or
Yeah.
requirement. And so it's all about intent and motive. And
Hmm.
I just think that too, I'm thinking about this and I'm not sure if it lands exactly with the previous question, but it feels like it has some relevance about the internal narrative from a step parent in kind of maybe being a better version of the partner that left the marriage and saying like, I'm going to be the hero
Mm,
here. Isn't this kid so lucky that, their former parent who was, addicted to
yeah.
Hmm.
alcohol and never celebrated mom's
Mm-hmm.
birthday and was because they're hearing all the stories about why the divorce happened. But to that child, that parent who maybe suffered with addiction or who is angry or is no longer in their home in that environment as a voice in their life, and they're going to naturally want to support and celebrate the person who's unhealthy. But if the step parent comes in and says, well, you should comply, like I am the one who is saving your family,
Yep.
and just leave the saving complex for somebody who is superhuman and not you,
Hmm.
because in my world experience there is no one that is perfect in a divorce narrative. And yet step parents and bio parents might think that this is our time to showcase the health that this child never
Yeah.
had previously. And that's actually quite annoying from a kid's perspective. Is no, 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 I don't care how healthy you think this relationship is. I am missing something that was meaningful and healthy for me. And so meet me there, and don't try and project that you're the
Yeah.
hero.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a strong pull to love our biological parents
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said earlier, my family of origin, my blended family of origin was a result of the death of my mother. Now, she died when I was 13 months old. And so when my dad remarried when I was around 7, the interesting thing about me uniquely, I was the youngest, and um, I had this little 7-year-old story in my head, like, I'm going to get a mom. Like, I never had a mom before.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Hmm.
going to be really cool. Like, I was super excited. Unfortunately, stepmom was hyper focused on compliance. She didn't focus on connection. And for her, she had some of her own history, and that escalated, and that was created a lot of chaos in the home. I'm grateful to have walked through a major journey of forgiveness for both stepmom and dad before my stepmom passed away as well. But I just wonder, here's a little 7-year-old Michael who wants a mom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how easy would it have been to just focus on
Yeah.
connection, and how radically different could that story have been if there was somebody who just went, oh, hey, maybe we could focus on this first, and then we can talk about the how we're going to act in our home. I don't know. That might be a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I know that there's so many different listeners. And Lauren, you have a story that came out of divorce. Mine came out
Mm-hmm.
of death. But the principles behind this human relationship piece that you're talking about are the same,
Yeah.
regardless of our dynamics.
I venture to say that the rabbit trail actually has a lot of relevance in the story to circle back to the main event here, because I think some of us often get lost in the patterns being blended family specific or
Mm.
step family specific, but the connection problems we see these every day in my vocation, in our community, in our culture. This is a connection issue. And if we can always prioritize connection, we're going to get compliance a lot faster. And and connection doesn't mean ridding yourself of any boundaries. Connection doesn't mean a yes mentality to all things. Connection doesn't mean breaking your own personal core values to appease somebody else. Connection means being heard, being seen, having value, being validated, giving the person the respect that they deserved as a human being, that we might differ in opinions, but you still have human value. And I think if we could take it one layer back, the ultimate goal of health and relationship, blended family, biofamily, or family of humanity, is to see people as worthy of pursuit and connect with them in a way that validates and honors their heart, period. And I wonder if we had more patterns of that type of connection, that the structure in which the connection is happening maybe would lose some of its power. And I think it's because we put so much value on the structure of the environment rather than the human heart as a whole. And so perhaps there's an opportunity just to gauge your own connections, and blended family, biofamily, whoever's listening, that how are you seeing people in their humanity and validating their experience and listening to them and seeking to understand them, and offering empathy, because doing that will likely get you more of what you want in return.
When I hear that too, I'm thinking about, a listener who's like, okay, that sounds awesome. How do I do that? What are some ideas of how to actually do that?
Well, I do have a second book.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yes, please.
Relationship Essentials, Noah. But I think we lack the tools for connection because nobody teaches us this stuff. Most of the people that we know in professions of therapy and counsel and trauma care and restoration, amazing, necessary, without a doubt, beautiful vocations. Where we're lacking as a community is in that prevention piece of how do we teach each other and strangers to connect? Where are we learning relationship skills? And there really aren't a lot of resources for that. We assume that because we're people, we should just know how to relate. But what we end up doing is we watch the relationships that we were exposed to, and then we repeat those patterns like we talked about earlier. And so, plus there's a stigma, there's a social stigma that I've seen, that if you say, I'm going to go take an art class, or I'm going to take a coding class and learn how to better engage with AI, people give you so much praise. They're thinking, you're so intentional. You must be so smart. I'm inspired by your curiosity. The second people say, I'm going to go learn some relationship skills, people say, oh my gosh, you must have issues. You're broken. Are you somebody I can trust? And our whole goal here at the Center for Relationship Education is to turn that narrative on its head and say, wait, I want people who receive the opportunity to get skills for healthy connection to be celebrated and applauded as people who have the edge in life. Because if you know how to connect, if you know how to cooperate, if you know how to communicate, you have the edge. And nobody seems to want it. They just want to disconnect and isolate and do it their own way and focus on themselves. And it's not having healthy effects on our communities and our hearts. And so maybe we can inspire a movement to say, I need tools to connect, and I'm going to listen to this wonderful podcast that Mike and Kim have, and I'm going to seek out a class at a community center, or maybe a place of worship, or I'm going to register for a class or read a book about how to be a better relational human. And I think that is a fun opportunity to explore of, well, you know why, but the reason we don't have the how is because society doesn't offer a lot of tools outside of the repair process or the crisis process. And so let's get ahead of it in prevention and care for each other enough to say, what do we need to do to be better humans?
Yeah, I love that. It's good.
Yeah. And along those lines, how can we regulate these tough emotions that come up? I mean, we are going to experience pain in our blended family, but what are we going to do with that pain? How are we going to manage ourselves in the midst of that pain so that we can show up and love each other well, even when it's hard? And then how can we learn to resolve conflict in a healthy way that honors everyone?
Yeah.
And those are skills that anyone can learn. But you're absolutely right, Lauren. It's not something that everyone believes that they need or wants to invest in for some reason. And we're also trying to turn that around. So woohoo. Glad we're not alone.
Yeah.
At a baseline level, boxing is really fun. That's been a great anger management strategy.
Okay.
I like to take a lot of my frustrations out on a hanging bag and a sparring partner. So
Nice.
if you're somebody looking for a new hobby to
There you
try,
go.
boxing is a great
So I
release.
just heard Lauren say the best relationship class she took was a boxing class. Okay.
True story.
Right on.
Get it up and out. Hey, don't let it fester.
You need a place to fight fair, and boxing is all around a ring, and you have reps and you have boundaries, but you need to get the fight out of you, and pretending that you're not a fighter is not working. Let your kids emote, let yourself. I have kind of a quarterly cry every season when I just feel overwhelmed and stressed. And if you see me just lose it, it's because I'm bottling up a lot of stuff. And it's just, this is the natural expulsion in biology, is to
Get it out.
to scream, to cry, to yell. And I think we've demonized those emotions. We celebrate emotions like joy and compliance and happiness and inspiration, but we demonize emotions like anger and overwhelmed and disappointed. And emotions are not good or bad. They're just how you feel. And we need a place to normalize the fact that all emotions have a place in the human experience.
I love that. That's good.
There's a quote in your book that we absolutely love. We can't let you go without talking about this quote and putting it out there for our listeners. You know, we repeat it all the time, and you're speaking directly to step parents in this quote, especially step parents that are being rejected. And the quote is, "You cannot refuse forever someone who loves you well." What would your number one piece of advice be for a step parent who's just ready to give up? Like, I've tried everything. This kid just doesn't want a relationship with me. It's not worth my efforts. What kind of advice would you give them? And how would you apply this quote? Like, you cannot refuse forever someone who loves you well. How did that play out in your life, Lauren?
Well, I remember writing that quote, and it came with a little bit of risk, because refuse forever someone who loves you well is not necessarily set up with a set of behaviors attached to it. And so some parents might read that and say, well, my stepkid still doesn't call me on Mother's Day, and they have refused forever, and I've loved them well forever. But this is a heart quote for me, not a behavior quote. And what I mean by that is, in the truth of the human experience, when your heart has been cared for, nurtured, provided for, pursued, seen, validated, and has made you feel worthy, you lean in and you press into that source, whether that is a romantic partner who finally, asks you to marry them, and you just cannot imagine your life without them because they pursued you so well, they loved you so well. And even if they're imperfect, which they are, you find the beginning of that story that says, this is why I've chosen to let you in. And I think that loving someone well who doesn't love you back is the hardest part of that. It's the biggest rejection story. And I think we live this as parents. I think we live this sometimes in the backwards, upside down injustices that we face in just the things that don't seem to be like they're meant to be. And yet, when you can find a higher perspective and a path out of that and say, I know that I loved this child well, whether they express it or not, that child is going to feel loved well. And that should be the ultimate goal of step parenting, is not to get the accolades, not to be invited to the graduation parties. And I know that's unfair, but at a soul level, you're doing amazing transformational step parenting connection work if you can continue loving well somebody who doesn't even deserve to be loved.
Well put. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and that's difficult, and you're right. Sometimes that comes with, we'll say, improved behavior. Other times it doesn't, and sometimes that's seasonal.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to walk through some difficult behavior moments to get to the other side of that. I've been a stepdad for 24 years now. We just got to hang out with our oldest, Kim's daughter, Annika, for a couple of days. And it never ceases to amaze me. I look back on some really poignant moments where I remember slamming a door on that kid once. And I'm like, man, that was really not a good move. And then I remember also a moment where I think I showed up pretty well, where she was going through a rough time at school and getting expelled and had problems with the law. And I remember sitting in the driveway, just me and her in the car, having a real heart-to-heart conversation. And I think those heart-to-heart moments outweighed the stupid moments of Mike just being selfish and slamming doors and throwing his fit, because I'm pretty good at fit throwing. And now, we show up to pick her up a couple days ago, and she just immediately is right to me with a hug and happy to see me. So when I think about that quote, I think I have worked at loving her well while very imperfectly. And over time, that heart shifted. And we hear that a lot in so many other stories. The ones where we hear the greatest amount of distance are the ones focused on compliance.
Yeah.
And there's a principle in there. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the metamorphosis of the cocooning stage of a butterfly is the most stressful time. Think about it. You can picture it hanging. It's tied so tight. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of struggle. And it looks nothing like it did when it came and got wrapped up in this part of the transformation process. And I don't think of myself as a caterpillar, but when I was a little kid, I remember having this vision of like, I don't think caterpillars want to become butterflies, because they basically get tied up and strangled for, a couple of weeks. And then, but I remember reading an article once, and when I was in elementary school, we released monarch butterflies as one of our science units. And that was a long time ago, but I still remember it. So cheers to my fourth grade science teacher. But I remember learning that if you try to minimize that struggle in the cocoon stage, there was a scientist who cut a millimeter, which is barely a measurement, a millimeter with an X-Acto knife into the cocoon to try and lessen the struggle. Those butterflies died. They never got their wings. They never took flight. And I think where a lot of families give up is in that cocoon struggle. You've got teenagers, you've got big events, you've got milestones, you've got rebirth of grief cycles. And you just get so frustrated that you're not flying with this beautiful picture of transformation. And it's almost as if the struggle, the slamming the door for you, for example, without if you had just constantly and chronically, given up on that hope and said, this isn't worth it. And you wouldn't have those take flight moments that are on this side of it, but that takes a lifetime sometimes, and people aren't willing to wait a lifetime. And so I just want you guys to think very future oriented in wherever your struggle is. You might feel wrapped in the tightest cocoon, and you just want this kid to tell you that you matter, to say thank you, to acknowledge you publicly or privately, and they're just not there. Remember, they're isolated in their own pot of grief, and they are birthing their wings, and eventually they'll fly out of it, and they'll look at the patterns of how you treated them, and they'll at least give you the respect to say you were always kind and always nice and worked hard. But sometimes we're not. sometimes we're not always kind and nice, and we need the
Mm.
grace as well. So
Yeah. What better way to teach kindness and grace than offering kindness and
Yeah,
grace?
to model it.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
So as we wrap up, Lauren, this has just been amazing. We just love having you on the show. Thank you so much. But I just have one more question. What would your number one piece of advice be for a bio parent who's really struggling to understand and connect with their kids? Their kids are hurting and they just feel like they're on the outside of this pain and they just don't quite understand how to approach their child.
thank you for the question, Kim. And I do think it's a meaningful one to end with, because ultimately there is the role of parent, whether it's step or bio, is to guide and direct and connect with children that you've been entrusted to, whether that's through birth or adoption or kinship or foster care. The parenting role is to enjoy
Mhm.
humanity and connect as family. And I think we make it a lot about other things. We make it about training and disciplining and directing and providing, and all of those are part of the equation. But if you lose the connection piece, all of that other stuff doesn't
Hmm.
matter. And so I think the biggest pain that I've experienced in my life is when you feel like your kid can't grasp how much you love them,
Mm.
and you just want them to get it and them to know it. And many of us may be able to relate to the reality that they won't and can't get that until they experience it for
Yeah.
themselves. And so I think I might just say that remember your why,
Mm.
and remember who these children are, and try and release some of the structural burdens that we read about and learn about to do this perfectly. And just the best parenting advice I ever got from my pediatrician when my first was born was, your job is to recklessly learn to know this
Mm.
child, and everything else will fall into place. So because you already have a fracture against you, and a child might step back from being known if they feel like the divorce or the death has hurt them, do your best to stay present and lean in to know your
Mm.
kids, know how they're wired, know how they're made, know what they need, and then try your best to meet them where they are. And I think it'll lead you to beautiful places.
Mm.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful, Lauren. Thank you
Love
so much
that.
for
Love
that.
that.
If you're listening and you're struggling and you're not quite sure what all of that means and what might be a next step for you, we want to invite you to grab a copy of In Their Shoes. And we're going to put a link right to it in the show
Hmm.
notes. So that's really easy for you to grab. And along the way there as well, Lauren mentioned the book Relationship Essentials.
Yeah.
We're also going to put a link to that book. So if that one piqued your interest and you're like, okay, well, what's the toolbox I need
Yes.
in order to actually do that? Maybe you can grab a copy of both and see how they intersect.
Hmm.
In the meantime, Lauren, also, if somebody wants to reach out to you and they just have heard your story and said, "Gosh, I really need to talk to Lauren," how would they go about doing that?
I love that invitation, or I like when people
Yeah,
reach
Hmm.
out. Um, so I'll just give you my
yeah.
email. It's Lauren, Lauren, at myrelationshipcenter.org.
Wow, that's so
And
gracious.
I would gladly connect with you that
Thank you,
way.
Lauren. That's very
Great.
gracious. We will make sure that's in the show notes as well. And somebody can
Hmm.
just reach right out and you can send an email to Lauren, say, I heard your story, and maybe you have a question or just maybe even want to just give Lauren a little encouragement. That would
Yes.
be great for you to do that as well.
And again, read the book. It's so good. It's a must
Hmm.
for every blended couple, bio parents, step parents. It's a game changer,
That's right.
honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. Lauren, thank you so much for
You
joining.
guys are so kind.
No, so good. Thank you so much for
Yes.
joining us, sharing a little bit of your story and your expertise.
Yes.
I love how your life has been woven in such a way that you take what you
Hmm.
experienced from the past and you're making a difference for people in the present.
Yes.
And I know that your story is so much a part of that. So thank you
Yes.
for what you're doing.
Yes. We so appreciate you.
Well, it's been a joy. I'm humbled to be a resource, and I just am in it with you all. So thank you for the work that you're doing to get this out there.
Thanks again so much.
Yep. Thanks so much, Lauren. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Man, it's always a pleasure connecting with Lauren. We're so grateful for the wisdom and perspective that she brings, especially when it comes to helping parents and step-parents understand their kids more deeply and build some authentic connection.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. We appreciate the hope and the insight that you share with our listeners. And this was such a rich conversation. I especially loved how Lauren used real-life moments, like that ugly, thorny plant that frustrated her as she would walk through her front door, how over time it bloomed into something beautiful and fragrant, greeting her as a gift rather than a burden. That picture reminds us how even the hard seasons can shift and become something meaningful.
Exactly. Seasons come and go. Just because you're walking through a tough season now doesn't mean it will always be this way. I loved Lauren's analogy of the cocooned caterpillar, struggling, stuck, but eventually breaking through and spreading its wings. You know, the truth is, challenges can feel overwhelming, but when we walk through the struggle, something beautiful can emerge on the other side.
Yes, and we really get to that place where we can fly. These are powerful images of truth that you can hold on to every time your family hits a bump in the road. And as our friends at Family Life Blended say, difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations.
For sure. You know, Lauren's family has traveled some very difficult roads. Divorce, grief, identity crisis, confusion, hurt feelings. But even through that pain, their journey led to real love and meaningful connection. Not perfect, not without work and effort, but beautiful in its own way.
We hope you're encouraged by Lauren's story, and we highly recommend her book, In Their Shoes. It's a great resource for understanding your children's experience and staying connected through the tough seasons.
Yeah, and we'll put a link in the show notes to that book. You know, one of the most powerful things Lauren shared is that for kids, a blended family isn't a fresh start. It's a re-engagement with grief. Now, that's hard to hear, but it is reality. Kids often carry the emotional burden of living in two worlds, managing the stress of duplicity, transitions, adapting to different expectations, new routines, personalities, and all kinds of styles, right?
And while we can't take that weight off entirely, we can do our part to lighten the load for our kids. Next week in our Simple Step episode, we'll unpack some of the challenges that Lauren mentioned and how we as parents can lighten the load and avoid making things harder for our kids as they navigate these complex dynamics.
That's right. Make sure you're following the show so you don't miss that, so that we can all continue growing together on this journey. Wow. Thanks again, Lauren. We're going to make this episode a wrap.
Until next time.